I'm Stephanie Lindgren, and I'm an esports photographer.
I met Steph a good few years ago at a Smash event, which we'll talk about on the podcast. And I offered to pay her for some photos because I didn't know then that a lot of the photographers at events were paid by the organizer to take photos. So I was like, I will pay you for these photos you are taking. And she very kindly sent me the photos she had taken. And they were some of the best photos I'd ever had of myself. At the time, I was new to esports. So they were some of the only photos I had of me doing my job, but also more importantly, they were the best photos I'd seen of myself. She made me, I looked at myself in those photos and I felt strong. And they were photos that I used for years after that, or as headshots and as examples of what I was doing, because they were just, to me, she captured moments so well. I think she's one of the best esports photographers in the business. And yes, esports photography is an actual thing. It is a specialized field of photography and it's a job, which is why we're going to chat to her today to find out a little bit more about it. I've always been curious about the concept of an esports photographer because I think a lot of people don't realize that taking photos of people playing games in a professional setting actually is a skill. So explain to me what exactly an esports photographer does.
So I would say an esports photographer, obviously the simplified version is just, goes there and takes photos. But as you said, there is a skill involved in it. Like you really have to study your game and know the players and just like get the vibe to get the right photos. Like I say with any photographer or any photography, like anyone can take a photo, but it really makes a difference of like knowing your game, knowing the lore, knowing what's going on to really make those photos. When you notice the family members in the crowd, anything like that, like it's definitely more of a like empathy focused skill, I'd say, rather than just clicking a button.
So it was really interesting to me because a couple of years ago, I met a photographer who he's done skateboarding, he's done surfing, he specializes in extreme sports, and he was a freelancer as all photographers are. So he got a gig to do esports. And I remember the first time he was at this event, he did not know what to do. He complained about everything. He was like, how am I supposed to get pictures? Because obviously for a lot of the time there's no action, there's just a player staring at a screen. He struggled with the lighting. He was like completely freaked out about the whole thing. Fast forward a couple of years, he's actually perfected the art now. But I mean, that is something that I've wondered about because, like you mentioned there, you need to know the game, you need to know the players, you need to know the perfect moment to grab the photo. So, were you a gamer before you got into esports photography?
Yeah, for sure. I've been a gamer all my life. Like I grew up with this stuff. And growing up as well, I always heard about dream hacks, and it was like the perfect combination of like music festival and gaming. So like I already knew kind of what I was getting myself into. But even back then, like I wasn't really into photography, but I knew that's kind of where I wanted to be and like spend my time for sure.
And did you always want to do photography for gaming specifically, or was photography the first love?
I would say photography. I dabbled with it. So originally I actually hated it. I literally thought like anyone can take a photo. Photography is not art. But I kind of, shoot myself in the foot there nowadays. And I just dabbled with the camera in high school and then traveled a little bit and then started volunteering at DreamHack. And that was like my first introduction of like taking photos that would actually make a difference, both for myself and the people I was shooting. And then that's kind of like my main high as to why I do it for sure.
So you mentioned that you volunteered. I mean, this is a conversation that's come up now on two or three episodes because a lot of people got into esports at the start. They weren't being paid. They just were like, "Hey, I want to come and maybe for you just take photos. Someone else wanted to do something else." So I'm presuming that was unpaid. You were just like, "Hey, I've got a camera. Let me take some shots."
Pretty much. Like for DreamHack specifically, I started in the social media team. And then I noticed that we were also working with the photographers, and the photographers aid us in making nice, cool content that's relevant. And I thought to myself, like, if you want good content, I should probably like try and dabble with that and see where it takes me because I felt so inspired by the other people I was working with. So I just kind of built on that. And then after a while, it went from working with social media to just focusing on the photos.
So I'm curious from a photography point of view. You picked up a camera. You're very good. And I know that you don't say it enough, but you are extremely good. I'm presuming when you started, it wasn't just a natural thing if you said you weren't really a fan of it in the beginning.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it was more like, I guess I almost challenged myself in a way since I talked so much shit about photography. I was kind of like, okay, since I talked all that smack, now I have to kind of show up So what is my image? When I look into the camera, what am I seeing? And what do I want people to feel? Because I think the primary thing with art is wanting to feel something. That's what the best type of art does to you. So that kind of provoked me to see things in a different way and frame it in a way that I think if it would impact me, hopefully it could also impact like another anti-photographer person, if you'd say so.
And I mean, from a gear point of view, how much, because you obviously have to buy all your own stuff. When you started out, what camera were you using?
I think so in the States it's called like a Rebel XSI. It's a Canon. So I've always stuck with Canon. And then I went to a Canon 5D Mark II. Funny story about that is I bought it used and it died on me my first event that I shot it with because I had no idea about like exposure limits or anything like that, and I had no idea what the hell was going on. So I was very much clueless into that, and I mean to this day, and I'll say it now, like people tend to reach out to me for camera gear. I am the least technical photographer you'll ever meet. Like I kind of see what my friends and other people are doing, and then like nitpick pieces of information and inspiration as to like what type of photos and what kind of gear do I want. So it kind of started from there, but I've always stuck with Canon.
But I mean, from a gear point of view as well, you're on your feet. You've got to get on stage, you've got to get the photos, you've got to get off stage. So I'm presuming it's not like you see these photographers and they've got their tripods and their lights and all their extras and they're carrying like 7 different lenses. I'm presuming for you, I'm saying I'm presuming, this is ridiculous. Let's not pretend. I'm there, I've seen you at events. You've got like your 2 or 3 cameras on your shoulders, you run, you get the photos.
Hmm.
You're not carrying massive amounts of gear all over the place and trying to set up.
Hmm. No, not at all. Like I have my kit, and I think like so I always bring my like full camera bag, which has all my stuff just in case I need these things. But I think like after a few hours after being an event, you kind of get the vibe of like which lenses do you need, what lighting do you need, things like that. And kind of just adapt always. Not all events are the same, but like with CS, for example, like my standard will be a 1535 and a 7200. Recently I started experimenting with primes, but like I always had like my go-to day today, and then maybe I experiment, try a new lens, see how it goes, but it always changes. But the kit is always there. There's like a fundamental kit, I'd say, that I have and a lot of other photographers go by.
So I'm curious because you've mentioned that you started dabbling in photography. So you didn't study this. This wasn't something that you then went out and got a degree and you learned everything you know on the job.
For sure, yeah. I've never been good at school. I'm always a learning by doing type of person. So I definitely just went with it and figured things out as I went. And like, it's funny to look back at my old editing style and like how I used to sort through photos and how I used to just do all these things and it's just so inefficient. Like it took me years to even know like the proper workflow. I've definitely cut my editing time more than by half just by learning like small tips and tricks, but that has come over time because as you just mess around and then you figure out what works for you.
It's so fascinating in esports how many people, no matter what the job is, a lot of people just learned on the job. That was the thing. They didn't really study this,
Yeah.
it was just a passion. So, what is a
Hmm.
usual work day? If we take you to an event, so it's, let's say it's day one of the event, the media day is done. What does
Hmm.
your standard day look like if you're working that event?
The day one is usually, I'd say, the most boring. I tend to describe it as like a Pokemon Snap. So for larger tournaments, like let's say CS, it's a very simple example. You'll go in and you'll essentially want to take a photo of every single player. And it doesn't have to be the craziest photo, but just has to be a photo that exists so that like the social media team can use them for that. So once you've kind of done rounds of that, then you can get a bit more experimental. So you get the fundamentals done, and then after that, you start experimenting with angles, waiting for timings, seeing the emotions. Again, paying attention to the storylines to hear like, is this qualifying match? Is this an upset? Anything like that. I'd say that's yeah. The day one is the basics.
I mean, you're taking the photos, but one of the things that you haven't mentioned there is once those photos are taken, you have to run to a laptop or a computer somewhere and then you have to edit. I mean, how long
Yes.
does editing, and I've seen the amount of photos photographers take at these events. You've got like hundreds of pictures. How long does editing take for you?
I'd say that's actually a good point you bring it up because day one also includes getting your presets done. So I use Lightroom to edit, and not all events have equal lighting, of course. So day one is really nailing those presets so that the rest of the event's workflow is going to be as smooth as possible. And it can take I'd say maybe an hour or so, which is why sometimes the best of three is the best you can do because you'll have time to like edit and take your time. While best of one is way more stressful. So that definitely makes a huge difference. And what's funny about that is you'll make these presets, and then the day in, there's a high likelihood you'll go in and be like, why is this person so yellow or so blue or whatever? And then you kind of refine that process throughout the event.
How quick is the turnaround then on photos? How fast do you have to get them to your client?
It depends. Some of them are way more laid back. Some of them just want them for like post marketing stuff. But then like a trophy shot, for example, that's literally minutes, like less than 10 minutes, I'd say. And usually you work in a team. So if you're, in my opinion, the ideal team is three photographers, you'll say like, okay, who's doing the front shot and who's going to make it a priority to dash over and upload those, so that the other people can hang around and get those like memorable moments that may not be as like you don't need them as quickly, but they're still have an impact. Like at the major with people holding their babies and hugging their families, like you can't get that if you're solo and having to do the trophy shot. So
So it's interesting because we're talking now, and you're at the level where I'd argue you're considered one of the best in the world in esports photography. We see you at all of these big events. But when you started, like you said, you had just picked up a camera. Photographers are freelancers. Most of them are not hired, especially esports photographers. They're not hired by any specific organization. So how do you start making money? I mean, how did your journey look?
it was very much a year by year progress, I'd say. So my first year it was a full volunteer with DreamHack, and they have like I don't want to say barracks, but like a sleeping hall. We bring your sleeping bag, just like the attendees, but for staff. So the first year dream hacks were that, and then after that I started to reach out to tournament organizers and go like, can I just show up and take photos? Like no pressure. I just want to make sure like I have credentials, whatever. And they said, yeah, sure. After that, the year after, I'd say they were like, oh damn, we're actually using these photos for marketing materials and like social media and these things. And they started to see the value in my photos. So then a couple of them would reach out to me and ask me to show up and be like, oh, we'll cover your hotel or your flight, like some bit of that. And then the third year is when a few clients actually started saying, like, we'll get your hotel, flight, and give you some kind of day rate, whatever it is. So it's been really gradual. And I think that process has been really good because a lot of the controversy about volunteering is you shouldn't work for free, but there is, a benefit of the networking that you do in the context that you make. Like, I don't think I would have been able to make an impact with my photos for these TOs if I hadn't just shown up and done my thing. Like, you really, I say volunteering is about having to prove yourself at the end of the day.
Well, that's the thing, right? You want, especially what we do, like you said, you're creating art, but if people can't see that, they're never going
Yeah.
to want to invest in it. It's curious to me though. So you start out, you're going to these events. I mean, that's got to be quite a big capital expense for you to lay out in the beginning because you've got the gear, you're obviously learning on the job, but now you're also having to fly yourself or catch trains to different events. You've got to sleep on the floor in barracks, like you said. I'm saying on the floor. I'm presuming there was some sort of bed, but it's
No,
not
I
a.
slept on the floor in my first dream act because my air mattress died. So it was awful. I eventually, some point, just put some chairs together and fell asleep on that. So it was rough, but you know.
Wow. So there we go. I mean, and you've got to spend all that money to go to these events to sleep on the floor. When you were doing that, was your focus like, cool, I'm going to do this because in time this is going to become my job, or was it just, hell, this is really fun. Fuck it, let's go. We're just, I want to travel and I want to see these places and I want to take photos.
It was definitely in the latter. So like I've always enjoyed traveling for starters. So I enjoy traveling, and I enjoy meeting like-minded people or like people with similar interests. So that combined with then the response I would get from my photos was massive for me. A huge drive. Like I've taken some photos throughout the years that like some people have like said it's something they're going to show their grandkids and means the world to them, where they frame them or it's hanging in their grandma's house. The impact it has on that is what's kind of kept me going. Even when I did it for free, the memes people would make, like some of the stupid stuff, being able to like provide that joy. I want to say it sounds weird, but being able to provide something for people that they enjoy and then seeing the immediate effects of it is definitely what kind of kept me going. And at first, before I was even paid, it was just like making those connections and capturing those moments that just was like a high, I'd say.
It's fantastic. I mean, I've seen so many of your photos from so many different events around the world. And I mean, that's something that's really cool about your job now is that you do get paid to go to these places to take photos. But do you
Mm.
think esports photographers, I mean, it sounds all luxurious, flying in, staying in a hotel, but I mean, is it, I see you all at these events, you're on your feet the whole day. You're just running
Mm.
backwards and forwards. And then I know you're editing. I mean, it must take its toll on you maybe physically and mentally, especially for someone like you who goes from one event to another. I think you live out of a suitcase if the airlines don't lose your suitcase, but you live out of a
Correct.
suitcase for like weeks on end.
Yes, that is correct. And I'd say that what gets me kind of going is the people I work with. So not just the other photographers, but the teams itself, like LTOs. Like there's like a traveling circus in a way, and there's also a lot of consistent characters that you're going to meet and see during these events. But it is exhausting. After a while, like most recently, I was traveling for 7 weeks straight, and as much as it was fun, I did have dips in that where I just had this like emptiness and just tired. And you do need a break 100%. Like you said, you're on your feet, but then it's also kind of emotionally taxing to pay attention to make these connections. And I mean, as a general introvert, that kind of is a bit taxing on you. So I'd say like it sounds very glamorous, but it's not without some small minor crashes there and there. And that's why it's so important to also take time, recognize that and take time at some point. Like you just can't keep going, because at the end you're just going to burn yourself out and not have that passion anymore. And when you don't have the passion, well, then it's just a job, right?
100%. It's interesting that you mentioned there because I know we've spoken about this and you are an introvert, but yet you have such an incredible read on people and their emotions because that's why you get to capture the moments you do. So that's impressive to me because normally introverts, you know, they're not people, people if you like, that I don't even know if that's a saying, but they're not really the folks that understand those emotions, and yet you have such a good read. So it's probably pushing you a little bit there as well because I'm sure your battery is very drained. I mean, your battery will be
Mm.
drained at the end of this conversation because that's not really your thing at all. But now you spend the whole day having to capture people's emotions.
Yeah. Definitely. But at the same time, I think over the years I've kind of found my balance. Like I know I'd like to think I know when to say stop. I need to go back to my room, rest, not talk to anyone for the next X amount of hours or whatever. And then at some points you will have these social interactions that will be so rewarding that you do feel energized from it. But it's about kind of feeling yourself out. And then I think that introvert extrovert balance that people have changes gradually throughout the years, just as we do. So over time, I think I've figured out what works for me currently.
It's interesting because I remember, and I don't know if you remember this, but the first time I ever met you, I think I was on like my second or third job. It was a Smash tournament in Sweden. I was so
Yeah.
nervous. Yeah. And you were there, and we were both so quiet. I just remembered having a conversation, asking if I could pay you for photos, and you saying, well, you don't have to because they've paid me. And we had this like really awkward exchange. And it's so funny because years later, I've obviously seen you at so many events, and I think we're not those weird little awkward nerds that were kind of like, this
Yeah.
is really cool that I'm here, but like, should I be? I was always like, someone's going to realize I shouldn't be here and kick me out. Did you feel like that for a while?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think imposter syndrome kicks in every now and then too. Like it's that's one of the double-edged swords with working with other people is like you can work in a team and then someone like gets a sick shot or several in a day or several in several days and you're just like, why do I even do this job when other people exist who do it so much better than me? Like what am I doing? I still get that sometimes as well, like, and it goes, I think it goes with those crashes that I spoke about earlier when you're working for too much of just like not being inspired and then you kind of lose that motivation. So it definitely happens. And I've also been on the other spectrum where people told me, like, you give me imposter syndrome. I hate you're my friend, but I hate you right now because like I didn't take this photo or whatever. But that's also one of the most fun things because at the end of the day, it's about how you handle it. And I think most of us, the way we handle it is going, okay, I'm done moping. I'm just gonna do better. So in a way a motivating factor to have that imposter syndrome as long as you're in the right company with the right people.
It is interesting because you mentioned the imposter syndrome and like some of the stuff you've touched on there though. Your job is, I mean, the when I say your job, the product you produce is very subjective because it is
Mm.
art. Is that tough? Because I mean, I'm sure I think your photos are incredible. I've used them for years, but I'm sure there's someone else who doesn't think that they're incredible or doesn't like your style. Is that
Mm.
tough knowing that especially as a freelancer, that you pitch for this work, but it's completely dependent on whether someone likes your style or not?
Yeah, definitely, like, it always no one likes hearing that someone doesn't like you or doesn't like your work. I think that's just a human thing. But I think how I feel about my work and how other people feel and tell me this overrides that completely. So if my style doesn't work for someone, it's just not meant to be. It's kind of like not getting a job. You think you wanted a certain company, but maybe you weren't right fit culturally or whatever. Like, there's not much you can do about it. You just move on. And at the end of the day, I think with art as well, no matter what art form you do, as long as you're happy with your work and you feel something, that's all that matters.
Do you think that esports photographers over the years have started to garner respect? Because so I'm obviously based in a region where esports is still developing and growing, and for I mean, even now, people don't want to pay for photos. Tournament organizers in South Africa can't understand why they should pay for photos. They want all these sick
Mm,
photos, but they don't understand the value of it. I think that
yeah.
that's changed globally, but I mean, did you have to fight quite hard for tournament organizers and event hosts to realize that, hey, actually, this is something you have to pay us to do because this isn't, like you said, something that anyone with a camera is able to capture.
I'd say so. And there's definitely a clear difference between tournament organizers in the States versus Europe or North America, rather. Um, I think people in North America understand the value much quicker. And despite what you'll say about, capitalism and all these things, they see the value and they'll even shell out a few extra dollars because they see what you can provide and they want to incentivize that. Europe, I noticed for sure that they kind of try to cut costs or whatever, and I almost have to re-explain sometimes what I do and why it's important. So I definitely found myself not battling or arguing, but like having back and forth with clients about like, okay, this is actually what you're paying for. I've been doing this for years. You can't just start paying me less. That doesn't really make any sense.
And do you find that there's a lot of people who come into the industry going, well, I want to be a photographer now? Or is it quite
Mhm.
a small, I mean, what is the barrier to entry? Are there lots of these people popping up with their cameras? Or do you find that it tends to be a small group of the same faces? Because in my experience, the best photographers, there is a select group that you know you'll likely see one, two, or three of them at every major event.
Yes, I'd say there's definitely more, and that actually makes me really, really happy. It depends on the event. I'd say I've noticed definitely more faces in the fighting game community, and I think that is because it is easier to get access and to show up with your camera. While other tournaments, they're in like arenas, there's security staff, like it's a whole thing. No flash photography, which I stand by. Do not use flash at these events. I will lose my shit. Um, but yeah, there's definitely some new faces, and that also is kind of a motivating factor for me because like I do get a lot of people who go up to me and like say they recognize my work or get inspired, and I love that. That's so important because even though you have like this handful of the best in the world or whatever, after a while, you know each other's style. You know what you're gonna go for. You know that they're gonna get this sick trophy shot or whatever. But then you have these smaller people, newer people that show up and then take these shots where that gives you imposter syndrome. This person just shows up and they just took this amazing shot that I never thought of because when you've been doing this for so long as well, you kind of have like this workflow of like, I'm going to do the stage, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. These people are like climbing up on ladders, like doing these weird angles. And then that's, kind of how you started. And then it makes you revisit what have originally got you going. So I think that's brilliant. And I wish it was more accessible for other photographers to go to like Dota events or CS or League or anything like that. So yeah, that would be amazing because we need to grow the community for sure and nurture it.
Definitely, and it's something though that I think a lot of new photographers maybe don't realize. You mentioned the flash photography there, but there's a lot of struggles when you're thrown into an event as a photographer, and it's I think a lot of the time the setup of the event, no one's really thinking, are we going to get sick photos of this when they're setting it all up? So what are like some of your bugbears, if you like, the things that happen where you go, really, do I have to deal with this today?
That's literally me with staff photos. That's the least thing I like to do, actually. But there's everyone has their days, I'd say. It goes in and goes out. But overall, I think again, the good feelings kind of outweigh the bad or the things that you don't really want to do, or if you're having a shitty day. Like some days I'll be like super down or sleep terribly or whatever, have anxiety. And then just show up, and then like either the photos I take or the people I'm with will kind of change that. So it's just about getting out there and doing the thing. Like you can't just give up and let a bad day be a bad day. Like see if what can happen.
So you take a lot of the live action shots, but I've actually never asked you this. Do you do all the media day photos as well? Have you been hired for that before, where you have to do all the profile pictures of all the players?
Yeah. I do that sometimes, and sometimes I also do like the remote editing for some events. Um, they're kind of hectic at times. Some people do it really well, some people do it really slow and chaotic. Like the thing is, and I hope players watch this as well, it's like no one really likes the media day. Like it's a hassle for everyone. Everyone's tired. I'm not making you do this. And when I'm making you do this, the one time like I don't have to and I tell people to like do any pose they want, they're like, "Oh, I'm so cringe. I don't know what to do." Like either you do this or you stop complaining. Like
I mean, this was
it's
the yeah. I mean, I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry. I was gonna say this is always something I found fascinating because obviously I've met lots of players and they're a lot of the time they are quite awkward and I think that a lot of players are very concerned about looking silly on the internet. That's a big thing. But even I know that if you I'm fine talking to a camera, but if you point a camera at me and
yeah.
saying I'm taking a photo, I go like full awkward. Like I don't know what to do with
Yeah.
my face. I pull it and I'm really uncomfortable with photos. So I get it. And I was curious as a photographer, when you are on like a time crunch on a media day, and for anyone watching who doesn't know what the media day is, it's normally the day before the big event starts. All the players get kind of corralled in and you got to take these individual shots and these team shots that are going to be used. And you've got to get through like 50, 60 players very fast and none of them want to be in front of the camera. So I was just curious from your side, like how the hell do you get that right? Because that must be a really difficult day for any photographer.
For sure. I'd say it's more difficult as well with like newer players. Luckily, over the years, a lot of the players know that I don't love the media day either. So they kind of come in and we joke about it. And they're like, oh, do I have to do the thing? Like, there's a recent media day where so normally they do like three poses or three things or four. And then this media day they came in, and I was like, great news, everyone. We're only doing one photo. And they're like, this is the best media day ever. And it was like, it's a win-win from both sides. So I think overall we've kind of made a joke about it and we just go with it. Newer players tend to be a bit more awkward, but I always explain to people, I try to, especially if I notice that they're like anxious or whatever, that like one of the reasons I do what I do is I hate when people take my photo because I don't know, I spiral and I can't stand it. And it's mostly because of my parents, because parents usually can't take photos for shit. So I say, I don't trust people to take my photo, but I trust I can take a good photo of you. And that's my kind of like motivator to like make them feel a bit more comfortable as best as I can. I don't think very few people feel comfortable having a camera shoved in their face, no matter what.
100%. Where did that? I mean, this is just popped into my head after we were chatting there. But where did this like esports pose come from? And if you don't know the esports, it's the crossed arms. That's like the go-to. Where did this whole cross their arms originate from? Do you know?
That's actually a great question. I would love to know this as well. I think it just came from maybe like football and other sports that they do. I mean, football they usually do like the arms behind the back. And then some of them have done the arms crossed. So I think it just comes from wanting to imitate sports for sure. And I'd say once again, why I also favor this pose is it's much easier to crop out and edit. Like when you're doing the keying and everything, which is like removing the background, it's much easier to edit this than someone's doing crazy stuff with their hands. You have to go in between the lines and in these things. But what's funny about that as well is there was some tournament I was watching, maybe it was the World Cup, and I noticed that they started doing like the funny pose thing, like point at the jersey or whatever. So interesting enough, I think all sports, anything competitive is trying to like bring out more character in people by making them do poses. So it's just part of the package of being a professional. So sorry, guys.
It's your job. You can win some money. You play games for a living. Just take the photo. You've been, let's talk about the fun parts of your life specifically, because you've got to go to all over the world, and I'm interested, what would you say, if you look back, is there one event that stands out for you where you say this was probably the one that maybe one day I'll tell my grandkids about if I ever have grandkids, or the event that if it all ends tomorrow, I'll go, I'm really grateful I got to do that?
Oh man, I don't know if there's a singular event. There's a few photos where I'm just like, I'm I'm so good at this. Like you'll have those moments. I don't care. It's okay. You're allowed to say, damn, I'm good. All
You
right.
are allowed
Hell yeah.
to own that, yes.
So I don't think that's a sole event, but I do remember like doing a gauntlet of like I think it was 2019 or something. I did some big events. I did like a CS major, I did Worlds for League of Legends, I did Evo, and then the final boss that I was missing there was the international for Dota 2. So I think that's my most memorable gauntlet of doing things like that. But I think every event has their key moments. I think if anything sticks out to me, it was actually the Rio Major, the group stage. That was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. Like it's going to be hard to top a group stage like that. So that was definitely one of my favorite events, like overall, and obviously a lot of fighting games as well. Like there's always the best part about fighting games is the grassroots vibe. So there's most likely going to be an upset or some crazy moments or even some rivalries that are always a pleasure to capture.
So is there a specific game title that is your favorite over the others, or are you not? I mean, are you able to even say that?
Yeah, I'd say Tekken. Tekken for sure. Like it's something else. I've had some friends shoot an event recently where there was Tekken, and they're just like, "This is amazing. When do I get to shoot an FGC event?" I've had so many people from other esports and more professional ones or whatever tell me like, "Can't. What's my intro into fighting games?" Because they see like the hype and everything is just like next level. It's not as formal as most other esports. So Tekken fighting games is always going to be number one for me.
I mean, I get that from a hosting point of view, because I just did a big global fighting games event, which isn't my jam. It just happens to be in my home country, and it blew my mind because we're allowed to trash talk. The players are like so much more involved. Like there was like we could trash talk players on stage, and I'm like, you never are allowed to do this. And like the players loved it. They wanted that. They wanted you to give them a hard time. I was like, that whole vibe is actually like really fun, and I completely get that. It's so different to like
Mm.
a Counter-Strike event, which I love, but it's not the same. There's like a little bit of like sass and spice to it, which was really cool.
Mm.
You did mention some of your favorite photos though, so I wonder, would you be able to tell us what is one of your favorite photos that you've taken?
Yeah, so the first one that comes to mind is my photo of Arslan Ash 21 Evo. Because of like the historical impact that had in so many ways, not just within Tekken, not just within fighting games, but just within esports. I remember that having a huge effect on people, and that was incredible. I almost feel like taking that photo was like an outer body experience because everything was just so perfect. So that's one of them. Sonic Fox versus Goichi at Combo Breaker also was one where he's standing out yelling, and it's like this, I don't know, accidental Renaissance painting type of thing. Um, there's one, speaking of the Rio Major, where KDN is looking at the audience and he's doing the clap, and his arms are spread out. And you see the audience mimicking his clapping, which was crazy. Um, and I actually recently really enjoyed the tears of Apex when they won the major. There's a specific shot I got where his eyes are just bloodshot and tears just running from his face. And like, I mean, I'd probably hate if someone took a photo like that of me, but given the context, it just works and it just feels good. So those are the few that come to mind. I'm probably forgetting something really important. Someone's gonna look back at this and go, "How did you not mention this?" But those are what's going on in my head right now.
I felt that Apex photo, I feel like it's for him, it would be that picture of every time he looks at it, he's like transported back to that emotion. So as much as
Mm,
it's like, I don't exactly look my best, it's that moment where I felt my best. And that's what I
for
think
sure.
for me, I mean, I'm not a photographer, I can't take photos for shit, but I love photos because I feel like they capture one moment in time, but the emotion that they're able to capture.
Mm,
And for me, I always like looking back at photos that people have taken of me, because even if they're not my favorite photos of myself, I know exactly the moment I look at it, I know exactly what I feel in that moment and
yeah.
what I felt, which is kind of the beauty of it, really. And I think that's why
Yeah.
I do think photographers are like the unsung heroes of what we do, because you capture those iconic. It's nice to have the videos, but the photos, it's like that split second of there it is. That's the beauty of it. Would you say that's the best
Yeah.
part of your job, or is there something else that's
100% are like definitely top 3 or 5 of that. Like I was thinking just of another like favorite photo example was when Faze won the major in Antwerp. And like the photos I took of that, like, so thank God for the pyro actually, because the pyro created this amazing like bokeh glow effect on these photos that made it look so dreamlike. So I'm thinking specifically of there's one where Twist is hugging the trophy, and it's just like you that's not gonna come across on video. Few people are probably gonna remember that. So to be able to like capture that dreamlike moment is like that kind of gets you going. And I mean, I do the same thing when I look at old photos, not even just esports, but in general, because I'm a very sentimental person where, as you said, I'm just like, I know what was happening there, what I was thinking, it all comes back to you. And I think that's so important because like you can't really get that. Even with video, it's difficult. Photo, what they say, speak 1,000 words or whatever is worth 1,000 words.
100%? But now let's switch it over. I don't want to say the worst part, because I feel like worst is a horrible word. But what would you say is the hardest part about your job?
I'd say the hardest part can be like when you have these lows of motivation, when you're just at an event and you get in this imposter syndrome and you're like, why am I doing this? It's hard to keep going and then like kick yourself in the butt and say, okay, I'm gonna do stuff, I'm gonna pay attention, stop getting so sleepy. That's definitely a difficult part for it. Negotiating with clients can be tricky as well, like especially if you have this constant client, you want to have a good relationship, but you should also know your worth and know, like, I mean, with this like inflation in this economy, that you should be paid more, things like that, that can be tricky. And probably number one, which is for me, is saying no. Like not just to events, but saying no to certain types of photos. Like at some point, there is a limit for what you're hired to do, and you shouldn't overextend yourself too much because then people start taking that for granted. I had an old coworker who told me, like, if you always deliver 110%, when you deliver any less than that, people will think differently of you, because you're not giving 110%, which is the standard, and that kind of messes with how people value you and how you value yourself. And I think that leads to burnout super easily. So saying no is super, super important.
How do you deal with that though? Because I mean, this is something I've experienced, and again, different job, but similar feeling where, in order for me to be creative, or for me to like do the best job I can do, like I need to be rested, I need to be eating well. Like I know when I hit that low, like there is no creativity left and there is no drive. So I kind of go into autopilot, and it's very, very difficult for me to snap it out. I can hear myself, I become a
Yeah.
robot. If I even hear myself, if I'm at home creating content, I just don't create content. So when you're at an event and you're hitting that low, I mean, what are the things that you do to snap out of it?
Um, Hopefully if I'm working with an amazing team, which I usually am, I just look at their photos and I'm just like, what do I think they're doing differently than I am? Um, and get kind of inspiration from that. And then also some days, if it's like a longer event, you just need to accept you're having a down day, and that's okay. Do your job, do your best to your ability that day, and then just pick yourself up later. I don't think there've been very few events, knock on wood, where, because most events I'd say like are minimum like 2 3 days, right? There's been very few events where I've been like every day has been shit. That doesn't really that doesn't really happen. At the worst, every day is mediocre, which it's gonna happen. You're not always going to get potential esports photo of the year at every event. That just is not realistic at all.
Fair enough. So if you weren't doing this, if you weren't an esports photographer, what would you be doing?
Um, I think I've thought about this a while because I'm not getting any younger. So I'm like, what do I want to do when I'm tired of traveling and these things? Definitely something within creativity, within photography. I think I would be doing maybe some travel stuff, experimenting a bit, doing like, I think one of my old goals was to be like a DJ photographer, like traveling to these, or a musician photographer, traveling with bands, doing something like that, something with the same energy and the tempo as esports, I'd say, would be my go-to. And if not that, then like previously I actually worked in marketing for 7 years as I was doing photography. And I actually enjoy that. I enjoy like project management and optimizing things. So there's definitely a few different paths that I could go. But for now, I mean, this is my first year of freelancing full time, and I'm definitely making the most of it.
So you can, I mean, you've just said first year of freelancing full time. This is your full time gig. So it can be done. But I mean, freelancing is hard. So coming from like a corporate environment or from you get a guaranteed paycheck, is that something that you struggle with? Is I know for me, if I don't have work lined up, I have like major anxiety attacks. I just sit at home and have decided that everything is over and I'm gonna have to sell all my things. Like that's literally a week after getting back from a job if I don't have something else lined up. So I'm wondering if it's the same for you.
It's literally me. Like I love to have my work planned out 6 months in advance, 1 year in advance if I can even. So that one's super tricky, and especially going from like a steady paycheck to freelancing, has been super scary in like a financial aspect. But I'm also very neurotic about money, so I've actually saved a lot. So I'd say rule of thumb I'd heard from a lot of other freelancers, at least within Sweden, is have 3 to 4 months of salary backed up when you're experimenting with this to see like where it can go and if it makes sense. And then just be smart with your money. But definitely anxiety comes with that. Like I don't have anything for September and October so far, and I'm just like, what do I do? What does this mean? Is this a reflection on me? Do I need to like go out and grind and find something, or should I just allow myself to rest? Like it's a really tricky balance. And even now, after these 7 weeks, I decided to take some vacation to move and relax. And I've missed some events, and I've had the anxiety where I'm just like, oh, I should have gone. I should have put myself out there more. But you kind of have to build your own schedule and just be smart with your money and be smart with your time.
We probably have to help each other because I feel like a lot of what you're saying resonates very. I'm exactly the same. And I went through like full on panic because I didn't have anything lined up. So then I started, now I'm doing the podcast, I'm doing all this other stuff. And then the work came in, and now I'm going, well, actually, something will, like you said, I'm going to have to learn to say no somewhere. So I feel like maybe it's just, I suppose it's just that thing of like, you have to be brave to be a freelancer, but you also have to be, I think you have to be smart, like you said, and smart with your money. So of course you're going to stress if you don't have a gig. So
Yeah.
what is the places that people can find you? So if they're listening to this podcast and they want to see your work, they want to see your photos, where can they find you on the internet?
They can find me on twitter.com as long as it doesn't go to complete trash, which is looking like it's doing. So, Vexanie, Twitter, Vexanie.com is also my website, my portfolio, Vexanie, Instagram, Vexanie, everything. I've done a great job at like finding this stupid nickname that is kind of unique, like instead of something like generic that's gonna get lost in SEO. So if you just Google Vexany, I think I've done a pretty good job at establishing myself. So you'll find a way to contact me no matter what if you
And
search my nickname.
if you search that nickname, and then finally the if you had one tip that you could give any aspiring esports photographer, what would it be?
First thing that comes to mind is like, don't do this for money. Don't do this because you heard of the $1 billion esports industry or whatever. Do it because you give a shit. Because I've worked a lot of events with people who come from commercial or whatever, and they just got thrown into esports, and they spoiled a bunch by just not knowing what's going on and not having a passion for it. And when you have a passion for it, like not only will you get sick photos, but you're gonna make amazing connections with people for life, and that's the driving factor, and that should be your motivating force. So just keep doing that, be smart about it, and I think that's not just within photography, but applicable to life, right? If you're passionate about something, you just keep going. You find a way to make it work because you love it.
You've been listening or watching Tech Girl Talks, a podcast hosted by me, Sam Tech Girl Wright, where we focus on the gaming and esports industry. For season 4, we've been chatting about jobs within esports. What is your job? What does it entail? All of that good stuff. But there are 3 other seasons that focus on industry news, titles, specifically Counter-Strike, all sorts of other things. So make sure that you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. We'd love a review as well. And of course, if you'd like to get hold of me to chat a little bit more, you can comment on the episode you are watching or listening to, or alternatively, you can hit me up on social media. It's at TechGirlZA, pretty much everywhere.